So just a brief introduction on that. That's a good catch. I didn't start recording until I was about 15 minutes into the last one. And so it's not a complete. So this is good. We'll get the full on this one, and I'll make sure the recording and the slides are available for everyone after we're done here. I'm going to give just another minute for folks to trickle in. I know we had someone join just now. There will also be a bit for Q&A at the end, and we can even do some live demo work. So, if you have questions and they're super urgent, throw them in chat. Otherwise, we'll have kind of like free discussion once we're at the end. I'm going to get one more thing together here. Let's see, do I have my notes here? Yep, cool. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment. There we go. All right, so you should all see my screen now, big red block. If you can't, let me know. And I'm also going to try to set it so that I can see new people trying to join. Hold on one second here. There it is. Keep that menu down here. That way, if some people straggle in, we can let them in. So you want to make a podcast or other recorded video or audio or combination video audio media that is uploaded to a platform for later, not necessarily chronological consumption by the end user. Shows. This is broadly speaking about podcasts, but we have a bit of experience working with YouTube as well, and a ton of experience with publishing stuff on Spotify, which it turns out is actually not that hard. So this can apply to a lot of different disciplines, not strictly a podcast, but keep in mind, we're going to couch everything in those terms. I will also try to apply, things to YouTube as well, where I can. We're not a creator that has a ton of video content. So there are some things I can answer, some things I can't. We'll get to that. I'm going to go ahead and lay out the steps for you. And this is broadly how the slides will follow as well. I think I'm funnier than I really am. I put in excruciating and precise order the steps: concept, timing, host and co-host, equipment two, process, software two, cross-promotion, analytics, and pitfalls. And because I ran this past my belted line as I was creating this, I know the next question is, can't equipment two and software two be just one thing? No, shut up. So why those specific things? To put it really blunt, and I've got it written here. Any podcast you're going to make is art. Any YouTube show you're going to make is art. And I can't tell you how to make your art. If I could, I'd be a Serpent Knight. So maybe Vidalia can at some point tell us how to do it. What I can do is I can walk you through all the places where I have screwed up in some way. And some of the sort of best practices that we found after doing this for, as long as we have. And people always say like, oh, you guys have a process. Because if you look at someone like myself and you look at someone like my knight, Sir Flo, we're just chaotic, disorganized, distracted people. So the fact that we would have a process of any kind sounds just blasphemous. But it's true. It didn't always start that way. Myself and my knight, we both work at the same place. And it's a small kind of startup thing called Innovative Learning Solutions. But what that means is that we have to wear a ton of different hats. So for Gary, or for Sir Flo, that means he has to do a lot of video editing. That means he has to do a lot of audio editing and things like that. For me, it means I do a lot of website design. It means I do a lot of, actually a lot of accessibility design. There's a lot that goes into, being a part of a startup, and you kind of have to be a master of a lot of things. It's very distracting. So we started with a lot of talent and not a lot of process. We sort of discovered that as we went. We needed to have a better way of keeping track of everything and of sort of, managing all of these different parts, because there is a lot of component pieces to making a podcast or show of any kind.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, not just like scheduling, making sure everyone's on the same page, knowing when and where you're going to meet. And it's managing, of course, your guests coming on, if that's something that you're planning on doing, but also managing your team, which consists of like hosts and co-hosts and things like that, and making sure that everyone is informed and on the same page.
Yep, absolutely. So really having as much of that ready before you start even one episode is going to be important. Ryan, I see you asking how you turn the sound on. If you can't hear me, I'll type it in chat. Hopefully that helps. So yeah, this is broadly speaking, we sort of arrived at this, it's kind of like safety regulations. Those are written in blood. This process is written in frustration. We've lost plenty of episodes due to not having a good process or not having a good, backup regimen, things like that. So it is really important that you have some kind of process before you start. Before we jump in, the first thing you want to find out is the concept of your show. So I have broadly categorized what I think are like the five main concepts or the five main archetypes for any given programming. Now, again, these are all podcasts, but there are some YouTube examples. We'll get into why these are important here in just a moment, but the most common categories are deep dive informational. So that's your hardcore history. If you're a podcast fan, that is your fall of civilizations. On the YouTube end, that is your philosophy tubes and your ContraPoints. Usually hour plus episodes that focus on a really specific topic. They're usually sourced, and they have a ton of information and reading material to sort of follow them up. Then there are the short topic focused educational, and sometimes interview. So that's things like Stuff You Should Know. If you've ever listened to that, it's a great podcast. They'll spend maybe 30 minutes talking about like the history of yo-yos and how that got to be a thing. You also have your like Crash Course World History. If you're a YouTube person, that's your short topic focused educational. On YouTube, those are closer to 10 minutes, mostly because of how their algorithm works. You have your lifestyle, comedy, or entertainment. So on the podcasting side, that is My Brother and Me. It's if you haven't listened to it, it's a fantastic podcast. There's never a specific topic. They just sort of take questions from the internet and have fun with them. On the YouTube side, that's things like Smosh or Game Grumps. You also have your long form story-based entertainment. So that's your Critical Role, your D&D podcasts, the Adventure Zone, that kind of thing. Non-narrative interviews are just like it sounds, interview shows. So that's largely speaking the Joe Rogan Experience. Our podcast fits into there as well. As with anything, you're going to have a few areas where your thing doesn't neatly fit into just one category, but find where it fits the most, because that's going to help you answer a lot of questions as you sort of flesh out this idea. So what does it matter? What if I don't know? Knowing your concept will help you figure out how many hosts and co-hosts you're going to need, how frequently you're supposed to release. So for example, long form or deep dive podcasts can go way longer than a lifestyle or comedy podcast. Like I said, those are 30 to 60 minutes long, unless you're on YouTube, and then they're 10 minutes for a lifestyle, a comedy podcast. That just sort of informs the length of the show. We'll talk about that more here in just a second. But long form podcasts, if you've never listened to Hardcore History, first off, highly recommend it. But also every episode is 4 to 6 hours long. He does a whole 5-part series on World War I, where every episode is a different facet of that war. And they're extremely long. They're extremely well sourced. And, obviously you can't release something like that every week. So it's going to help you know how frequently you can release and how long your show should be, how to promote that show, potentially even your equipment requirements. Where I had mentioned before, the length of a lifestyle or short form podcast, max is really 60 minutes. The NHTSA released a study. Will you deal with the cat?
No.
The NHTSA released a study not all that long ago, which suggests that the average American spends something like 51 minutes in their car, round trip on the way to and from work every day. Obviously, this is a pre-COVID thing. None of us are driving to work anymore, but eventually we'll return to that. That's the big hope. So if you're not long form or you're not deep dive content, you really want to fit into that drive to work, drive home window, because that's when most people are going to listen. You can also think about your concept can also inform how many co-hosts you're going to need. In most cases, you'll probably need just one. If you are, if you're doing some content that is super long form, again, the Joe Rogan experience is a big one. You need a co-host to kind of help you keep things going. And we'll talk about how we ended up with 3 and why that works for us, but it's not a requirement.
So as far as concept goes, you can really brainstorm on this. If you're planning on having co-hosts, like if you just have buddies and you're like, hey, let's do a podcast together. I find it really helpful if you write out your goals that you want to accomplish, and then you can do some like mind mapping on that, if you know what that is, and just kind of really refine things. But writing down what you're wanting to do is really the first step, and then you can refine and brainstorm and everything once you get that step.
Yeah. So the next big thing is going to be timing. Once you know your concept, or at least broadly where you fit, we'll figure out timing and how often you should release, how long your episode should be. We talked about that a little bit. Just broadly stating here, anything long form or deep dive can and probably needs to release less frequently. Like I said, Hardcore History, that releases 2 episodes a year, if we're lucky. I think we got 1 episode last year. To be fair, it was a banger, but it was 1 episode. If you know that that's your show, really you can, and I've put here, as long as you can be enthusiastic, you can make your content 15 hours long if you want to. Seems a dumb idea to me, but if you can be enthusiastic about that the entire time, there's really no upper limit to how long you can make that content, because the people who like that deep dive kind of stuff will find time to listen to it. Shorter form podcasts, they're commuter focused, like I said, fit into that 51-minute, hour-long window. You're going to release frequently to become part of your listeners' week based on some relevant portion of scheduling. A lot of podcasts that are lifestyle podcasts release on Mondays, just to sort of help you get through the Monday blues or whatever you want to call it. We release on Fridays so that hopefully people will have listened to the episode before they go out to park. So they can have something to talk about. Like, hey, did you hear that crazy thing Imhog said? Yeah, you can't stab people and keep your knight's belt. Who knew? That's a real thing that happened. Listen to the episode. It's awesome. But just think about, if you are going to be releasing frequently, think about the best time. You want your listeners to really get into this thing. Monday's great. Friday's also great if you know that users are going to be doing something relevant on the weekends. So for AmpGuard podcasts, Fridays are great. Now, as far as hosts and co-hosts go, if you have a podcast, I have long form here, but that's not totally correct. If you have podcasts that regularly have guests, you don't always need a co-host, right? You already have another voice in the room. So a co-host isn't strictly necessary. You do need a co-host where you can't keep up the energy level for the entire time your interview is going to happen. Or if you need to make really, really tight releases and timing windows easier to hit, having that extra person or extra 2 people helps. And if you have a ton of research to do, research assistance is immensely valuable. It's an entire profession in the professional world, right? So speaking from our podcast's point of view, Flo and I bounce off of each other really well, but also what you don't see, because it's an audio medium for now, is usually in the background, I am doing research and I'm taking notes and I'm putting in timestamps. So sometimes I'll come up with a question and I'll ask it to our guest, and then I'm, head down in my laptop, putting all the notes in. So Flow is really good for filling the space while I'm not actively, part of the conversation. But also I am an extremely introverted person most of the time. So like just having conversations with people can wear me down. And so Flow and Teflon are actually really good at sort of picking up on when I'm starting to slump in a conversation, and they'll take that load off of me and sort of wear that for a little bit. It's extremely helpful. And then being able to, myself have the notes in and ready to go makes putting those releases up super easy. Basically, all I have to do is edit the podcast, throw in the notes that I already wrote during the episode, and then release schedule.
So when you're looking at finding a co-host or looking at that co-host dynamic, it's important to find someone that you have good chemistry with. And delegating those roles to each other. Like when Quan and I do the podcast together, I'm typically taking notes while Quan is working the equipment, and then we're both kind of sharing in the conversation. And like Cabbage said, Flo picks up the slack when Cabbage is taking notes, and Quan picks up the slack for me. And uh, those roles can be kind of figured out naturally as the podcast progress, but you'll find yourself typically slipping into them.
Yeah. The other thing too is you might have a friend who you like I did with Sir Flo. You go, man, we should really make a podcast. I like talking about planes. And then what you find out is that when you're drunk, it's an awesome conversation, but you're really saying the same thing over and over. You don't necessarily want a co-host that you agree with all the time. Teflon and I actually disagree on a lot of things, and we don't hate each other for it. It just makes our conversations better. And we bring that into the podcast, and we'll argue. We don't really argue, but we'll sort of test each other's points of view and say, are you really sure about that? And that's a good thing. If you have somebody that you are constantly in agreement with, it may not make for the best content, really.
Mm-hmm.
So keep in mind, and I apologize if you hear my cats losing their minds in the background. They're cats. So keep in mind that your co-host needs to be willing to call you on things, and they need to be willing to counter your opinion. If you share the exact same opinions, you can just take turns making the podcast, and some of you can have days off. Equipment. Now, I want to preface this by saying there's a whole bit here. You don't have to spend money to start a podcast. I am specifically speaking on if you do want to spend money to start a podcast. So the first thing is microphones. The easiest piece of advice that I wish I had known before I started, or if you're going to have a co-host, if you're going to have another person in the room with you on your podcast, you cannot use USB microphones if you're each going to have one. There's a lot of reasons for this. Basically, audio processing is actually extremely resource intensive and intensely, it's really CPU intensive. And so having more than one USB microphone on your computer just isn't going to work. So, if you're doing your comms over Zoom and you're trying to start a pandemic podcast, USB will work for now. If you've got a Logitech headset or something, it's going to work fine. But as things improve, and if you ever want to have a show where you're both there together, USB is out. You'll need something with an audio interface to really merge more than one input device together. We'll talk about that more in a minute. For microphones, it really is a stylistic choice once you get above $100. There are some fantastic mics that are, right around the $50 range. There are a lot of headset mics that are actually quite good for around $40 to $50. One of the best headset mics I've ever used was a $40 Logitech G430, something like that. The microphone on it had the best noise canceling I've ever seen. So you don't need to go big if you're doing something that's just you. If you're doing a long form thing, a headset mic might actually be more comfortable. But if you get to real microphones, and I apologize, mine are actually in Flow Studio right now. But when you get into real microphones with an XLR interface, that's that 3-pronged cable that plugs into them. Yeah, anything over $100 is a style choice. Which one makes your voice sound the best? Fortunately, before you spend the money, you can go to places like Guitar Center and actually, talk into them. If you feel like getting out, there's also a million videos on YouTube talking about, here's what this microphone sounds like. Here's how this microphone responds to bass levels and things like that. So you can do a lot of research before you ever spend a dime. There are also cardioid patterns. So let's pretend that this water bottle is a microphone and this is the end that you speak into. A cardioid pattern is basically a heart-shaped pattern that comes off of the front. That is where your microphone picks up. So if you are speaking into one of those mics and you move off to the side, you'll hear the volume of your voice drop pretty considerably. There are also field array mics and things like that. But a cardioid mic, a dynamic cardioid mic is going to be what you're looking for. It's going to have the best pattern. And if you want a specific recommendation, the Shure SM58, that is the most, if you close your eyes right now and picture a microphone. What you're going to picture is the Shure SM58. It has been the mic that has been used for 50 years. Not a lot's changed with it. It's super cheap. You can get it usually on sale around $70. But even at retail, $100. It's a great mic. This is, if you've ever done stand-up comedy, if you've ever done public speaking of any kind, that's the kind of mic they have. It's going to sound good enough. It's going to capture a huge range of vocals. It's going to be what you want to go with. I'm letting a few people in here. Also, you'll need cables for your mics, but don't worry too much about that. Don't buy used cables. If you go to like a Guitar Center, they have that big bin of used cables and they're all kind of dodgy. You can get Amazon Basics cables for $12. So really, figure out what your budget is, figure out your requirements. If you're going to have multiple people, you need to be willing to spend $100 or more, with some exceptions. I'll get into that. And once you figure that out, figure out what mic makes you sound best. If you can't decide, SM58 is the way to go.
Oh, so what's your preference on cable length?
Short. Oh my God. Yeah, I made the mistake of, we have a relatively small table where we shoot the episodes. And I bought a 20-foot cable because it was on sale, thinking like, 20 feet, I can do anything. And what I can do is get tangled up in my own damn cables. So remember that, unless you're going to be walking around a lot, and please don't, then yeah, just get short cables. They're also easier to maintain. They don't get kinked up as much, so they don't break down sooner. Audio interfaces is the next thing. So remember before where I said, if you're going to have multiple audio inputs, you need to be able to have some kind of interface to join all of that together. That's where we get our audio interface. These are going to take, multiple, it depends on the device. There's no guarantee. But anywhere between 2 and like 16 users, it's going to join all of that together on one device. I do have a recommendation, but this is just to say anything that takes an XLR input and has as many inputs as you need is going to work. Scarlett makes the Focusrite 2i2, which has 2 ins, 2 outs, 2i2. And that'll work. If you have a buddy that you're shooting with and you're in the same room together, that's going to work fine. I think it's like $60. You have there's a lot of complexity that you can add to these. Some of these will record on device, or they'll have a Bluetooth feature or a USB pass-through feature. Those will let you essentially hook it up to your computer and make a Zoom call and use that instead of your computer. There's a lot of bells and whistles that you can get. What you're really looking at is how much are you willing to spend, and then how many people are you ever going to need to have. So another big thing, and this is something we learned early on, is your audio interface needs to record in mono and not stereo. The biggest reason is that stereo audio, a lot of people listening to podcasts listen with one earbud. Either because they're working or because they're sleeping or whatever. But if you do it in stereo, you'll only get half of the conversation, right? That's literally how that works. But also there's actually a lot of reasons you want to record in mono for vocals. Most movies that you watch, if there are 2 characters talking on screen, that audio has been shot or has been recorded in stereo, or that audio has been recorded in mono, and it's been laid over top of a stereo soundtrack. So your characters can be talking and it sounds like they're flat directly in front of you. But any background music can sweep and move across the sound space perfectly fine. Any good audio interface is going to do this for you. So don't panic thinking you have to find the spec sheet for everything. It's going to be there for most of them if you spend more than $50. If you have background music or intro music, that can be in stereo. The opener and closer for WAK is in stereo. But remember that your listener is there for your voice and what you have to say, and not necessarily for your SoundCloud album. Now, I get a lot of asks for recommendations. And actually, the saga of the equipment that we use is a whole story. So day one, when we went to go record the first episode of the podcast, which I don't think anyone will ever hear, thank God, we were going to just record it on my iPad. I had GarageBand ready to go. And Flo calls me and he says, "Hey, meet me at the Indian food place. Let's eat something before we do this. I'm kind of nervous." Okay, I can always go for Indian food. So I show up and we eat. And my knight says the scariest words he ever says to me. He says, "So I did a thing." which is just nightmarish.
It's code for Flo saying, sit down, we need to talk.
Yeah. It's like, am I in trouble? What happened? So he says, so I did a thing, and I'm like, oh God, I'm full of Indian food and I'm scared. And he goes out to his truck and he comes back and he bought a $600 piece of recording equipment. We ended up using it for like 2 episodes. It wasn't the right thing for our show. It was super cool, but it was way too expensive for what it was, and didn't really. But we shot the first couple of episodes on it, and then we ended up returning it. Now, where this becomes a saga is we had, I think, no, we shot 3 episodes with it that we actually aired, and we shot probably 2 more that we didn't. So we had a couple of episodes in the tank, and then Flo decided, I don't like this thing, I'm going to take it back. So for the first 3 episodes of our podcast, we didn't actually make new episodes or have recording equipment. And it comes up to episode 4, like the day of, and I'm like, did you get the new thing? Did you get the recorder so we can make the next episode? It's got to come out today, and I'm going to edit it at midnight so we can. No, he didn't. He drove down to Alabama and they didn't have what he needed. So I'm panicked. I'm running around like a crazy person, checking pawn shops, and I go to Best Buy and they have something specifically made for podcasting. This is called the Zoom PodTrack P4. So it's got 4 XLR inputs, 4 outputs. You can hook it to your computer, records in mono. It has been what we've shot 90% of our episodes on. And it's informed a lot of our purchasing decisions going forward, because this ended up being the perfect thing. If you do say, well, what do I buy? I just want to just tell me what to freaking buy. Buy this. This is portable. It has every feature I could ask for. Audio editing on the device.
This is what Quan and I use now that we've inherited it, and we're both technologically dumb, and this is really easy to use. So
yeah, it is very much what you see is what you get. We upgraded recently to the P8, which, as it sounds, has 8 inputs. So it's just a more complex version of this. But you can see here the multiple inputs are what's really important. I have a horrible webcam. These are what's really important: the ability to connect multiple microphones. So fantastic little piece of equipment. It's informed everything we've ever bought since, because it needs to work with this. It's so convenient. That is all a roundabout way of saying don't let Flo buy your equipment, because he will eventually take it back and then you'll be left without equipment for a while. So we actually have an equipment 3. I lied to you all. The real deal here is that you actually don't need any equipment. If you've got a good concept, if you're enthusiastic, you can record on your phone, and it's going to be fine. To help that, if you're going to record on your phone, go in your closet. All of the clothes make great sound dampening. So it will boost the audio quality. If you're just testing the waters, or if you just want to see if this is something you even like to do, don't spend a dime.
Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Game Theory YouTube thing, mm-hmm. But when he first started, he would record all of his voiceovers in his closet.
Yeah.
Just because it does dampen the sound really well.
Yeah. Griffin McElroy, the guy who edits and does most of the My Brother and Me content, he actually did the first 100 episodes using a GarageBand mic. So you don't have to make a huge upfront investment. Don't spend hundreds on equipment just to realize you're going to hate this. I let Flo make this slide. Do buy hundreds in equipment just to tell your family at Thanksgiving that you have a podcast. He's not wrong. There's actually podcasts that are shot exclusively on a phone, and the fact that they are, what's a good way to say it? Well, the fact that they are kind of shitty is the aesthetic, and it works well.
Because Flo's not here, I'm going to harp on his talking point. People listen to your podcasts not for your audio quality. They listen for your interests, your personality, the information that you provide to them.
Right.
So don't worry too much about that part.
Yeah, there are a whole, I can't remember the name, but there's a podcast where they literally review movies on their way to work. They carpool in, and they just talk about, the newest movie, and it's all done on a phone. So don't feel like you have to spend $200 on a Zoom, $100 on a mic. You don't. It will help long-term. It's going to make your life a lot easier, but you can get off the ground with $0 invested. Now, process is the next big step, right? You've got your concept, you've got your equipment. Now let's talk about how you're actually going to kind of put this together. So I mentioned before, both Flo and myself started with some experience thanks to our work. But it is a lot more complex than just hitting record and then uploading it. We got really lucky. Flo actually had a brief background in audio engineering. He did a lot of voiceover work. I won't give you the website for our work, but if you ever find it and you ever find our demo videos, you'll have Flo's voice narrating everything for you. It's very interesting. We both worked well together. We actually work in the same department, so we're able to bounce stuff off of each other. You may not have the same advantage. That's fine. Now for the what do I do portion of things. If you have guests, and even if you don't have guests, you'll need to schedule. You want to make sure that you're going to be, you're going to be, releasing this in a way that's sustainable. So you want to have your podcast done at least a day or two before it's supposed to go up, so you can listen to it, so you can fix any audio issues. You can actually correct a lot of sins in software if you don't have a great mic. You want to leave yourself some buffer so that you are not stressed. And like I said earlier, you're not staying up till 1 a.m. editing the podcast to get it up by 10 a.m. or whatever. You also want to make sure, that you're in a good headspace. And I have that a little bit lower, but make sure when you're scheduling that you're not, scheduling on the same day that you're going to have a medical procedure done and you're going to be in a weird, possibly anesthetized headspace.
I don't record when you're hungry either.
Yeah, I'll talk about that more here in a bit. I think our first episode is about Subway, the food, not the person. So scheduling, just make sure you schedule a good time for you, your guest, your co-host, or all three. Beyond that, researching and writing. So put together your topics and talking points for your podcast, especially if you have a really specific, like 60-minute style interview, you want to make sure that you have the talking points ready to go and that you're not fishing for them on the fly. Obviously record, that's going to be huge. It's the only thing that really has to be done, I guess. But yeah, make sure you're in a good headspace. Like Vidalia said, make sure you're not hungry. Make sure you're not lactose intolerant and drink a large chocolate milkshake right before you record. That happened to us last night. Really just make sure you're in a space where you're not angry or frustrated at something, your day job. There have been episodes, and I'll call it out. I'll call us out. The Kingdom of Kodiak episode, or the Kodiak episode that we did before we went on Kingdom of Kodiak. We actually recorded that one twice. The first time we recorded it, we had some audio issues that could have been fixed, but we also listened to it after we recorded, and we all kind of, at the same time popped up in the group chat and said, man, we were not in a good mood that day. And, Flo said, yeah, I was kind of shitty. I think I had a bad day at work or something. And Jeff said, yeah, I think I just didn't sleep. And what it ended up being was we did a real disservice to him as our guest. And we actually reached out to Kodiak and we said, hey, nothing against you. You did a great job, but we just were not on our game. Can we please re-record this episode, so that we're all in a better headspace? And he said he was super cool about it. He said, sure. And it was the one we actually put up. But yeah, you can lose so much. Like, you are better off rescheduling than you are just forcing yourself to go through and record this thing. If you are in a bad headspace, either figure out a ritual to get yourself out of it or reschedule. Editing, this can be a lot of different things, and I have a bit more on this in software, but fix your audio, mix your tracks down. You also need to bake in metadata, and if you're going to make a video, you'll have to do that during this step. Baking in metadata is just sort of naming the episode, that stuff. So when people download it onto their iPhone or whatever, it tells them the episode name. Beyond that, once you've got all of that done, you've recorded your episode, you've got it edited and ready to go. You got to hype people up, right? If you check the WAK page, we'll say, hey, this week we're having on Sir Michael Hammer of God, or we're having on Sir Golwyn or whoever. And we do that to get people kind of excited to listen on Friday. You can skip that. So if you do release weekly, so if you're releasing, every Friday like we are, you don't have to hype your podcast, especially if you're really consistent. People know to check at noon on Friday for our stuff. If you release less frequently, hyping is much more important. If you don't have a set schedule and you're releasing one episode every now and then, let people know. Say, hey, new episode this weekend, get hyped, get excited.
And hyping is more than just like doing it before the episode. You can also do like call to action in your episode, especially if you're using a platform like YouTube. which is where you constantly hear that like and subscribe, ding the bell, anything like that. That's called a call to action.
Right.
And it helps with your uh, subscribers and
Right. So then you will have uploaded, or you will be uploading and scheduling your episode for release. We'll get into it more in detail. Someone said they would like to hear an episode post oral surgery. Flo's having some dental work done. Let's see if we can arrange that. That could be fun. But yeah, so you will, I will say now, never use a service that won't let you schedule your uploads. If you have to release it at the same time you upload it, that service is garbage. Don't pay for it. Don't use it. And I have some more recommendations later, but yeah, schedule that episode, get it uploaded. Now, as your episode goes out, you need to be paying attention to listener feedback and analytics data. It's a really constant thing, and you're not always paying attention. So we released an episode on Friday. I don't just listen to the feedback Saturday and Sunday, right? You have to stay on top of that. The more you interact with the people on your pages or who interact with your content, the more promoted it will be by different services. Back up and archive your episodes. Back up and archive your episodes. That's mostly for me. Like I said, we've lost episodes because we just left it on the SD card thinking it's not a problem. And then Flo needed to use that SD card for his camera or something, and boom, the content's gone. He formatted it. So as soon as you finish an episode, take it, put it in Google Drive. There's the 3-2-1 strategy for backups that applies equally as well here. So that's 3 copies of your data backed up on 2 different mediums, 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations, something like that. Whatever, back up your data, make sure that you can't lose it. Google Drive's amazing and it's super cheap. That's all I'll say about that. There's a million services for it. Whatever, if you have a Dropbox subscription, that's fine too. And then get ready for the next episode, right? You just repeat that process. You'll notice different things about your specific schedule and maybe even the people you're working with that make this different. How you all coordinate your schedule will change. We all use Google Calendar, but use what works for you. Software is a big one, and I have a lot on this. I could actually go on about different audio workstations for a while, but I value your time, so I won't. We're going to split this into 2 categories, one that is specific to your podcast and one that is specific to collaboration. The first one is the DAW, or the Digital Audio Workstation. That's what you're going to use to edit your audio. You're going to merge and combine tracks. You're going to process your audio. You're going to fix audio with filters, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. The first thing is merging your tracks, and this is where having an audio interface again is super helpful. So when we record on this, I am on input 1, Flo is on input 2, and Teflon is on input 3. These are all separate tracks. So if Flo coughs or if Flo does a really big sneeze, what I can do is in the digital audio workstation, I can take Flo's track, which is entirely separate. I can mute that portion of the audio without impacting myself or Teflon. And then you never hear it. There are so many times when I am taking a giant rip off of my vape and I cough like a lunatic that you don't hear on the podcast because you can just swipe them right out. The filters are also really big. There's a lot of issue where people will say, oh, I listened to a recording of myself and I hated it. Do I really sound like that? People get self-conscious, myself included. You probably don't sound like that. Just realistically, you sound different, but you don't sound like you do in a recording. You can fix that with filters, and I'll talk about those more. Now, as far as digital audio workstations go, there's a lot of options. One of the best ones that you can get is entirely free and open source. Sounded weird to yourself. Yeah. Everybody sounds weird in their own head. Don't worry about that. You sound a lot better than you think you do.
Your first episode, I remember we went to a Waffle House after it released or whatever, and you and Flo were like, we sound so weird. I hate listening to my own voice or whatever. You'll get over it.
Flo told me I sound like Ben Shapiro, and I've never been able to let it go. It hurts me. But as far as digital audio workstations go, one of the best ones that's out there is free and open source. It's called Audacity. You can pick it up right now. I encourage you to play with it. It's fun. It's got a million plugins that are entirely free and built in. If you don't know, use Audacity. You will eventually find something that you probably don't like about Audacity that you wish could be easier, and that's where you might move up to something else. Currently, I'm using something called Reaper Studio, and I'll show that off here in a bit. Just when it comes to moving around and arranging audio, it's a lot better. It is about $60, which is cheap for a digital audio workstation. It has a free trial, and I would say it's 100% worth it. If you have outgrown Audacity, if you've used it for a while and maybe there's some growing pains or your files are getting really big, you might move up to that. There's also Ableton. A lot of people, if you look online and you're looking for an audio workstation, people will suggest Ableton because it's what a lot of professionals use. It can be up to $200. It has a free tier that I don't think is very good. Use the free tier, try it out, see if you like it. It may just be a me thing. There is also Adobe Pro Tools. There is also Adobe Pro Tools, which is, or not Adobe, Pro Tools is a separate thing. Pro Tools is free with some purchases. It is $60 if you buy it outright, but I know like if you buy a Focusrite 2i2, you get Pro Tools for free. There is Adobe Audition. Thank you. Thank you, Alona. It's $20 a month. Personally, Adobe Audition is a part of a bigger suite of stuff that Adobe makes. And the $20 a month tier gets you a few different things. It's nice, but I can't justify the purchase on my own end, so I haven't experimented with it. Apple has Logic Pro. That's sort of in the Ableton category. It's huge for music production, but it's probably a bit too much for podcasting. Still, if you've already got it because of school or something, it'll work great. If you have an Apple device, you also have GarageBand, which is entirely free. GarageBand is great. One exception to GarageBand, your tracks can only ever be 60 minutes long. If they're longer than that, you'll have to stop and then start a new one and then mesh those two together somehow. So just keep that in mind. Also with GarageBand, there's actually a setting for podcasting. I think there is a microphone input called narrator. And if you use that, your voice is going to sound amazing. So again, if you have an iPhone, you can start a podcast as soon as we're done here, or right now, but that would be rude. So next up, we'll talk about audio filters, because I mentioned those are going to fix your voice and make you sound better. The first thing you're going to do is a noise gate. And sometimes you'll see this called sidechain filtering. They are technically the same thing, but I could argue that they're different as well. Either way, a noise gate, what it's going to do is it's going to filter out background noise. So let's say you have an air conditioner hum that sometimes you forget about, but there's always that low in the background. You can filter that out by blocking all noises below a certain threshold. It's going to be different for everyone, but a good recommendation is start at negative 27.5 kilohertz. Again, I'll make my slides available afterwards so you don't have to remember that. And anything above 80 hertz. So that blocks out your really high pitched noises and your really low pitched noises. So traffic passing by, if you live close to the street, it's going to help a lot with that. So noise gate, super helpful. And you can do it per track. So again, if you're recording in different locations, you can actually block out your guest and set a different filter. Are there any decibel thresholds I'd recommend on top of that? No, 80 hertz as an upper end and negative 27.5 as a lower end are pretty good defaults. Most people fit within those bounds. If you have a really low pitched voice, you might have to adjust it. Any of the audio workstations I just mentioned are going to show the threshold of noise. So there's a little bar that will just kind of move, based on the noise. And then when you talk, it's going to spike up. So you can see, okay, my idle room noise is somewhere around 25, right? So then I just want to put my threshold here so that this idle room noise doesn't get into the track. And as long as you're always talking louder, it'll be fine. I can show that here in a minute. I actually will screen share my audio workstation. A de-esser. So something I didn't talk about, pop filters. It's just a little condom that goes on your microphone. So when you say plosives, that's a P, K, D. Those sounds that have a burst of air when you speak. It blocks those. A de-esser is going to help as well. It blocks that hard S. God, I hate it so much. And it's one of those things where when you're listening, especially in your car, it's piercing, right? It sounds like it's going to break your windshield. So a de-esser is really big too. Again, any audio workstation I mentioned is going to have a filter for removing those. No hard and fast rules on this one. Play with the slider until you think it's good. What you want to avoid is too aggressively filtering your audio. So if you do it too aggressively, then sometimes it's going to filter out every time you say an S, regardless of how harsh it is. So play with the sliders until you get it right. Bass and treble filters. Again, not every mic's going to pick up sound the same. The SM58 that I'm recommending is kind of flat, kind of monotone. Really, bass and treble is where you get the most bang for your buck. When you think, oh, my voice doesn't sound like that, you're right, it doesn't. Fix your bass and treble until your voice sounds like it's supposed to. For people who have met Flo in person, he has a very deep baritone voice. And when he comes through on the track, sometimes he's just a little flat, a little more nasally than he actually sounds. So I drop his levels just a little bit to fix that. Bass and treble. There's no way around this. If you have co-hosts, people talk with different levels of enthusiasm. I am a very loud person most of the time. Teflon is not. So I have to turn Teflon up and I have to bring myself down. It's either that or convince everybody to talk the same way. I can tell you from experience that second one never works. The other thing is sometimes your guest will, or your guest, not even your guest, sometimes you will get super loud. If you do a really big laugh because you got surprised by something, that's going to spike the volume on your track, and it may be really bad for the end user, the person listening. So you want to find those spots where the volume shoots way the hell up and you want to drag it down. Again, any good volume or any good workstation is going to have a volume adjust.
This can also be fixed as you're recording. Like if you know that you're going to yell something or laugh really hard, what Flo will do and what Cabbage does as well is they'll lean back really far to laugh. And that's something that people can kind of do naturally as well.
Yeah.
But it helps the microphone not pick up as loudly that audio.
Yeah. So if you have good mic etiquette, and I'll talk about mic etiquette for just a second as well. If you have good mic etiquette, and that is just being aware of where that microphone is in space, you want to be speaking directly into or across the top of that microphone. If you're talking and you turn to talk to someone, it's going to sound like garbage. You're going to have to pull the volume up for just that moment. Same thing, if you're talking and you lean in too much, it's going to get really, really loud for no apparent reason to your end user, right? They don't know that you're leaning in on the microphone. So just be aware of where you are in space. Make sure when you're recording that your stuff's in a comfortable position and that you are always talking into it. Like I will turn to face Vidalia and talk to her, but I'm still turning and making sure my microphone is between us. But yeah, if you are going to scream, if you're going to laugh, if you're going to do a killer Biz Marquee impression on one of your podcast episodes, lean back and then you can raise the volume of your voices as needed. That was a killer Biz Marquee impression. I don't want to hear it. The other bits of software, make sure that what you're using lets you save on local disk. Most of them have this ability. That is if you're recording remotely. So for example, we're using Zoom and I'm recording this Zoom call right now. I can save this audio file. I can save the video and audio if I want to directly to my computer. Some of them won't have that option, or they won't have it unless you're paying. Be really careful if you're recording remotely, that whatever tool it is that you are using lets you record locally. The audio you're going to get, and when you re-listen to this, once I re-upload the episode or whatever, the audio is not going to be as great as it sounds right now. It's going to get compressed. It's just, Zoom's goal is not to make a high-end audio product. It's to make a video conferencing product that also does recordings. There are some softwares that will let you do that. You can also look into optimizing audio for your specific platform. So Discord, Facebook, whatever. There are really good softwares for recording remotely without a audio workstation. There's sort of a software audio workstation that works in the cloud. There's Ringer, which is pretty cool. I think it has a small fee of like $5 a month. Squadcast, I think, works along the same lines. Anchor is a platform that's free. And what you do is it's very much like Zoom. You send everybody a link and then they join in and it's audio only. It's actually really high quality. I'll talk more about Anchor here in a bit, but just know those are sort of three alternatives you have. If you're doing remote or if you don't want to have a DAW or if you don't have the ability to get multiple tracks, those are options for you.
There's some other software things that I'd like to talk about, just because I do all of the graphics for the podcast. Uh, so you can use various different softwares for that. You can do Photoshop, of course. I use Adobe Spark to make like the um, logos and stuff like that. And then for like the podcast heads themselves, I use Procreate, which is like $40 or something
About that.
on an iPad Pro, and it comes with the Apple Pencil that has really nice like pressure sensitivity, so you can get that line variation. Um, Obviously, not everyone is going to have like drawn heads for their podcast, but it can be good for other things as well. But I especially recommend Adobe Spark, just to start out with, because it's free and it's you don't even have to download anything. You can do it in your web browser, and just really just like crank out whatever logo you want for your podcast.
Yeah. You can also just use a photo of your guest if you
Yeah.
really need it. Yeah, that's a good point. OBS for recording video is pretty good. You can record your streams live. It's also free and open source. So if you're doing a live cast or a stream, even OBS is something you're going to look into. As far as converting to video, my God, when I looked into video editors, I did not realize how contentious that discussion was. There are as many digital audio workstations as exist. There are twice as many video editing apps out there. Adobe Premiere works great. It's probably if you're going to pay for an Adobe product, pay for Premiere. It's worth it. If you have iMovie or Windows Movie Maker, those also work fine if your project isn't really complex. There's also, oh God, what's it called? There's also an iPad-focused app that is actually for video editing. It also has a desktop equivalent. I will have to find what that's called. I'll link it in the notes when I share the slides and everything. Really use whatever is available to you at first. If you're on a Windows PC, you have Movie Maker or you can download it. Use that first to get the feel for it. These are called timeline-based or chronological video editors. You'll have those different bars that show the length of something, and you can sort of clip them together to make your show happen in the order that you want it to. You'll outgrow that eventually, and it's deeply personal. You'll want to figure out what works for you. We currently use a mix between Adobe Premiere for some of the projects that are coming up, spoiler, and then iMovie for the really simple stuff, just putting a head onto an episode and throwing it on YouTube. So next part we're going to talk about is just the management side of things, as boring as that sounds. So managing the show takes a lot of resources. Social media platforms, email, project management software, backup software, your hosting platforms. Those are all really big. I am going to save us the time and assume you know how email works, and not talk about that. Just know that you're going to need to use email sometimes. Distribution. These are your platforms. YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Podcatcher, Vimeo. There's a ton of them. And you really want to be on as many of those platforms as you can, right? You want to have the easiest time for your audience to grab this content as possible. I have here, use Anchor for this. It's completely free. Anchor is actually Spotify's podcast hosting platform. So it is a little bit subsidized by the fact that Spotify wants people on their platform. So it's free for that reason. But they have a lot of cool features built in. They also have great analytics data, and they make it really easy to get your podcast to basically every platform except YouTube. I cannot think of a reason you wouldn't use Anchor other than you don't want to support Spotify, which, hey, I don't support Amazon, so I feel you there. If you don't want to use Anchor, there is Podbean or Podsign. Those are both paid services. They're not subsidized by Spotify, so they have to make their cut somewhere. They're fantastic services, though. They'll put together essentially an RSS feed, which you can then sort of syndicate out to those other services. You can look up a YouTube tutorial on it. It takes maybe 5 minutes once you've paid for the service and got it up and running. Regardless of what platform you use, make it a platform that lets you schedule your releases. At this very moment, I have 5 episodes that are scheduled and ready to go up. So if I were to end up in the hospital or something like that, the show will go on without me. Obviously, there's more important things to worry about, but just from a standpoint of I have a 7-year-old who I'd like to spend some time with eventually. It's great to have those episodes scheduled and ready to go and out of my mind once they're truly finished.
And it also gives you more consistency,
Right.
because even if you're like sitting there at noon to upload them, you're always going to be a few minutes off. So
Yeah. As far as video hosting, I have just used YouTube. Again, if you don't want to support YouTube and Google's sort of overarching family of products, again, more power to you if that's hard, and I respect you. Vimeo is a great platform as well. They're both going to work about the same. With either platform, what I have found is you have to make sure your videos are coded in MP4, and that they're pre-edited. Coded in MP4 matters because the conversion on their platform takes an eternity. I had one take 18 hours before I decided I was never going to do that again, and I was going to spend the time doing it on my end first to front load the effort. If you're recording straight off of YouTube, like if you click that start live video button, it's going to do it for you. But also make sure that your videos are pre-edited. The last thing you want to have to do is change some audio settings or clip a video using their built-in tools. They do exist. And every time I have to use them, I curse at God for allowing me to survive. A lot of my work in my real job is accessibility. So I have to add captions to videos and things like that. And they're the only tool to use really for captioning that is usable and free. There are some other options, but it really is a slog to try to use those things. Trello for project management. Yeah, if Trello would pay me, I'd sell their product. It's super simple. It's super flexible. You can work with your co-host or your guest to set it up how you need it to work. But as far as keeping episodes on time and scheduled, Trello is going to be essential. And again, this is one of those things I'll show off at the end for how we use Trello. But if you've ever worked in a field where you have to collaborate with other people, it's simply amazing. There's other softwares like Rike if you want to pay for that, or if you got a free sub. There's always different things out there, but that's the one I'm going to recommend. Social media platforms. Twitter is big. Most podcasts, most shows of some kind are advertising their wares on Twitter. For AmpedGuard, and if you are doing an AmpedGuard specific thing here, you have to remember that most of us aren't on Twitter. That's changing over time, but AmpedGuarders, by and large, they don't use Twitter. Facebook is a necessary evil. It's page management and their publishing tools kind of suck, but just sort of fight with them and you'll get what you want most of the time. Be prepared for scheduling posts and then Facebook to tell you don't have anything scheduled. 9 times out of 10 you actually do, and they're just not showing it to you. Be prepared to submit support tickets and say, hey, I'm not able to access this part of my page. What's going on? They're actually pretty good about responding, as much as you would think they're not. You kind of have to fight that fight to be on the platform. It's essential though. This is where you're going to hype up your episodes, especially with an AmpedGuard. There is a subreddit you can post there. Just be careful you don't run afoul of self-promotion guidelines that exist on pretty much every subreddit. Go ahead.
Also, when using Facebook, make sure you put the meatiest bit that you're trying to convey in that first like 250 character chunk, because most people aren't going to press that see more button.
Right.
So you really just want to like put all of the important stuff up front.
We've also found that for Facebook promotion, having an image in your post actually boosts how people will interact with it. Even if it's just, if you look at the WAK Facebook page right now, usually it's just a picture of us while we're recording making goofy faces. And that alone, like, even though it's dumb and it's really kind of nothing, it gets people's attention. Most of us are visual people, we need visuals to learn. And so it just kind of stands that would go hand in hand with promotion. Speaking of promotion, and more specifically cross promotion, there's not a lot of, and this is a changing, if I ever do this again, I'll probably remove that part of the slide. There's not a lot of organized amped media out there. We exist on a lot of platforms. There's the Paragon Path podcast on YouTube that you can go find. There's a Kingdom of Kodiak happening on Facebook every Wednesday. If you're free at 9 o'clock tonight, you should go check it out. It's Tuesday. Oh God. I'm having a week, you guys. Either way, check these things out. And this is becoming more and more organized.
Admiral in Cash has she Twitch streams and then she uploads all of the
absolutely.
stuff to her YouTube channel. That's really excellent.
Yeah. But this is all a roundabout way of saying when we first started, we were kind of wary of cross promotion. People would say, "Oh, you should come on my show," and I think it'd be cool. And I'm like, "Yeah, but what if all my listeners think your show is cooler and then they don't come back to my show?" And that's just not how it works. It was a naive thought to have in the first place. This is all a very long way of saying cross promotion can only really help your product, and it can only really help the other person's product too. So don't be afraid to go on other people's shows. I think Teflon went on to the Paragon Path podcast. We went on to Kingdom of Kodiak. We even hyped up Delos's stab chats. It's a lot of fun. It gets the word out there, and it helps people find stuff. Like those people are going to find your product. Your users are going to find their product. It's just a good thing all around. So don't ever feel like the promotion angle of being on somebody else's show is going to hurt you in any way. It's not. Sharing is, in this case, absolutely helping everyone. Analytics. So one of the biggest questions I get all the time is, what's the most important an analytic stat you look at? And I tell everybody all the time, user feedback beats the absolute crap out of any analytic data you are ever going to get. User feedback is somebody who bothered to listen to your episode and then bothered to find you and then bothered to tell you what they thought about that episode. That should be the first priority you have. It helps sometimes to establish a bit of like a peanut gallery that you let listen to the episodes earlier, something like that. But either way, anybody coming to you to tell you what they think is the most important stat. You can ignore the rest of it. That said, there are a lot of analytics that are useful, but in slightly different ways than what you would think. So what we look at is demographics of listeners, breakdown by platform, most popular episodes, and then listen or watch time. So each of those pieces is going to serve a function. For example, the demographic data is going to show the age and the rough gender breakdown of your listeners. We actually use that to figure out that we perform really well with men in their mid to early 20s. Surprise. Yeah. But we really didn't resonate with women or non-men, non-binary viewers, anything like that. We were just sort of under the radar. And this is where Vidalia came in and started doing the WAP episodes, specifically to target women and non-men's specific things within Amthgard. You'll notice, or you probably won't. We noticed on our end that our listenership for non-men spiked from like 2% to 10% from that one episode releasing. Platform breakdown can tell you what kind of content your users are looking into. So if more people are listening on Spotify, they're actually looking for episodic content. This is per Spotify stats. YouTube users are typically looking for video content. So what we've noticed on the WAK side of things is that most of our viewers are from YouTube, and we've decided we need to do more video content. Spoiler. Other podcasting platforms, the more entrenched ones like iHeartRadio that have been around for a long time, people look to those for traditional podcast content. That's your lifestyle podcast. That's your even your long form podcasts. Most popular episodes, those will tell you what kind of content people like, but it can be skewed. If you're talking about a really popular or controversial topic or a really popular or controversial guest, you're going to get a lot of people listening to that, and that doesn't mean that's something you should talk about all the time. So be careful when you look at popular episodes. Be sure that you're trying to distill it down to that episode's content, and then assess whether or not that is something that is, a flash in the pan or something that people want to hear more of.
Another thing that I think helped with the big bump of listeners that we got when WAP started was that we put the keywords of the episode in the title. You'll notice that the title is Women, Amthgard, People. And so if you're searching Women and Amthgard, that episode comes up. So something to consider.
So another thing is listen and watch time. Again, this kind of goes hand in hand with popular episodes, right? Your most popular episode is the one that has the most listen or watch time. A better way to look at it is most popular videos by listen and watch time. That sounds different than what it may actually end up being for you. So it's not necessarily the video that has the most views or the podcast episode that has the most listens. So listen and watch time per popular episode can tell you your most popular episode based on how many people getting how far into the episode. So if you have an episode where people listen to all 2 hours of the content, and it has the most viewers relative to that type of statistic that you're looking for, you can actually get a lot more useful data. Pitfalls. So these are things where we screwed up really bad and we want you to not do them. Always record in mono. Again, don't record in stereo. It's bad. It makes you sound bad. Make sure your SD card is actually good enough to keep up with your recording equipment. Again, this is specific if you have an audio interface.
Press the record button.
Yeah, we'll get there. But this is specific if you're using an audio interface. If you get a super cheap SD card, they're usually rated for slower speeds. And what you'll find when you go back and listen to the episode that you tried to record is that you only get a couple of seconds of audio and then it cuts out. And then you get the next couple of seconds and then it cuts out. And so on and so forth until you realize you've ruined an entire episode because the card has to buffer to fill space. So make sure you get a super fast SD card that's good enough to keep up with your recording equipment. SDHC class 10 cards are typically what you're looking for. I have always release on a schedule. Again, depending on the type of content you have, that's not entirely true. But release on a schedule whenever possible. Let your viewers know that you can be depended on. Don't force yourself into a single format. If you're doing your podcast and you realize you hate whatever it is you're doing, change it up. If you listen to the first 5 episodes of WAK, it was a very rapid fire question and answer format where we put the questions together beforehand, sent them to our guest, and then asked them those questions. It was very dry. It was very mechanical. We kind of switched after that. We listened to them and we're like, this is boring as hell. So we made the more conversational format that we have now. Again, listen to your user feedback. If you have a long-term listener saying, hey, what was up with you guys in this episode? You sounded like really disinterested. Did you just not like your guest or something like that? You need to, you kind of need to be available to take that feedback honestly and not be offended by it and just sort of adjust your attitude. That kind of thing. Don't, and this is big, don't gate your guests out of existence. So remember when I talked about noise gates earlier, how you can remove extraneous noise. You can be too aggressive with that. And that's where you'll hear, the guest talk and then stop and then continue talking and then they'll stop. And then it cuts out their audio. It's better to have extra noise in the background. If that's your worst case scenario, have the extra noise. Never record in a shitty mood. Just don't do it. You'll know, your guests will know, and the people listening will know, and it's just a bad look. And never record an episode you don't want to record. If you find yourself getting ready to go and at any point you go like, I just don't feel like it today. Absolutely do not do that. You're going to make a bad product and you're going to have the double challenge of, having to come back from that and having to not let that impact future episodes. And if people notice, it gets even harder. Like Vidalia said, never forget to hit record. I assume you've done that?
No, I did forget to hit stop. So now we have to sort through a 3-hour recording.
Right. So always make sure you're recording. Right. That's a big deal. Do a full test run of your podcast that you never release. Just listen to it. Like I said, there's a couple, I think the first 2 episodes, the first 2 true episodes of WAK, you'll never hear. We recorded those. It was mostly like us talking about our day. And what we're doing is looking for background noise. We're looking for mic etiquette. We're looking for leveling and whether or not we're interested. We're looking for, at any point while we're listening to it, we go, do I hate this? Also try to remember your mood when you recorded that episode. For one of our first ones, again, I had just eaten Indian food and I could tell that I needed to use the bathroom about 10 minutes in.
What I like to do, just so I stay like energetic or peppy, I drink coffee an hour before the podcast. And then the reason I do it an hour before is so I don't have to pee a billion times during the podcast. I know Teflon doesn't drink a lot of sugar or caffeine, but he'll have like a
Coke, yeah,
full
right
fat
before.
Coke, yeah, right before the podcast.
Yeah, get a ritual. Find a way to unwind if that's something you need. We try to play disc golf before we record. It usually works out pretty well. Also, and this cannot be stressed enough, look for ways to compliment yourself on that first test run and on every episode. It'll be the easiest thing in the world to criticize yourself, right? We're all really good at saying like, God, I suck at this thing. Don't spend all day criticizing yourself. Look for ways to compliment yourself and say, hey, I actually did that really well. Sometimes I'll compliment Flo just because he puts together a really solid sentence. Sometimes he rambles. So it's, and I don't do that to be mean. I'm like, hey, you phrased that really well, dude. Like you should do that for all of your questions. And so we do that as a way of sort of, keeping ourselves positive, right? You can beat yourself up until you decide never to release an episode, and that's not what you want. My God, I think we're at the end of whatever 30 something slides that I have. I'll open up the floor for just a moment to Q&A if anybody has questions. I know people have put stuff in chat, but if you want to unmute and ask me something, go right ahead. And then once we get through that, I can show you some of the software that we use and how we use it. My mouse. Oh, there it is. Let me on.
Questions.
No questions is good too. It means I killed it. Still want to give another. Yeah. Lord Aaron and Fate's Hand says, still want to give another go after I step down in June. I do, mostly because I want to get the point of view of a monarch who has just left office and see how you liked it and how you felt. So that would be a really cool one to get on the show. All right, fantastic. Feel free to throw questions in. I'm going to go through a couple of things that we do on our end, just to kind of give an example. So I talked enough about Trello that I have to show it to you, or else it's just a tease. Give me just a second.
I love Trello. I use it for everything, not just podcasting.
Yeah, I force everyone to use Trello. This is my work board. So Trello is organized into this system. There we go. Where you create cards and categories for yourself. You can actually have different Trello boards for different things. So you notice I have one for my work. I have one for the podcast. I have a personal and then a monarchy board, podcast board. So we've got this broken down into templates. These are things we're always going to have to access, or things that we'll have to run back into. Thank you for telling me I don't sound like Ben Shapiro. Honestly,
he'll like every once in a while we'll be like laying in bed at night and he's like, I sound like Ben Shapiro.
It's true. No, thank you though. I really appreciate that. So for Trello, we have a section for templates. This can grow as much as we need it to, but these are just, how do we ask someone for an interview? What's the checklist for a given episode? What is our intro? So whenever you hear Flo mess up the intro, it's because he's reading this and he's just not reading it right. We have reminders, persistent bits, things that always end up in the closer, or things we need to remember to plug.
Ooh, drag lightning to done and they can see how that works.
Where's lightning
on your to do? Yep. And so you can just at the bottom.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, then you just click it and drag it.
It's not done yet. We have to do a couple of other things.
Okay.
So this is our to-do. These are potential guests. Don't look, these are spoilers. I can't cover it up, right? So these are things we have in the works. Doing are things that we have actively recorded or are still working on. So for example, we have an episode with fiddles. This needs show notes. It needs a few other things. You can see our Crown Month schedule. And then these actually get filled in more as they go. So I'll show you one of the cards that we finished. This is with Pumpkin Jack. No, this is, I'm sorry, this is Michael Hammer of God and Merrick the 15th. But I have notes here for like, here's what I need to link in the show. These are the notes I take actively while the show's happening. So I get the timestamps and sort of, brief synopsis of what's happening. You can also add images. So for some, like when we did Loric's episode, he's a serpent knight. We got a bunch of images to feature in here as well. You can put important links, checklists, anything that you need. And most importantly, this is all collaborative. So if I drop something here, you can see all the people I have it shared with. Vidalia, Flo, any of us can jump in and look at it and say, okay, this is the next thing we have to work on. This gets used in tandem with Google Calendar. So we'll say, lightning interview on Monday, the 8th, right? And then there's a task in Trello for that lightning interview that we know we have to do. So then, Vidalia in this case will go do that episode. They need to go in and add show notes. So I would put a checklist like, and that's our standard checklist. It's not on some of these because we get lazy, but this is what this would normally look like, is we would throw in this checklist and make these, these are the things we have to have done for this episode to be released. And then once we do all of those things, you can take that and just put it in done. And it's really satisfying to drag these cards over here, you guys. It means you're getting a lot done. A funny one here. So Vidalia was talking about episode artwork and how she uses the iPad and a couple of different softwares to make the WAK heads. Sometimes we let Flo try to make the episode artwork, and then he does Pumpkin Jack like this. And I remember why we let Vidalia do the artwork. So this is where we do all of our planning, all of our note taking. It's going to go in here. Once we've recorded the episode and actually put it, gotten the files off the SD card, we're going to put these up in Reaper, and I'll open that and show you what it looks like real quick. Of course, it opened down here on my second screen. All right. So Reaper is going to have pretty cool interface. Let me find. Let's grab this one. So these are all of our separate tracks. Like I said, I'm on track 1, Flo is on track 2, Teflon is on track 3. Drop all of these in, keep these on separate tracks. And sound pad is going to be our intro outro. So right here, you can see the sound pad is our intro. I'm not going to play the sound because it's going to sound like garbage coming through this way. But this is our intro and outro, the sound pad is. You can see my idiot self, I'm talking through the intro. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab that bit where I'm talking. I'm going to grab it on this specific track, and I'm just going to cut that. So boom, you don't hear me interrupting our intro that I worked so hard to make. This is where you'll apply your equalizers, your de-esser, your bass, treble, all of that. I'm still talking here in the intro. I'll cut that out too. I can add different EQs onto every track. And then you can listen to it in real time as you're making these changes. Let's see. So Alana suggests Adobe Fresco.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So either way, as you're editing, you can see the entire track in real time. You can see areas where it spikes. So here on Flo's track, I'm guessing he's doing a big laugh. And you can see that it occupies the entire section of that bar, meaning it spikes super high. So I'd bring his audio down there. Different EQ options are available. You can split the tracks. You can do really whatever you need to do. For most tracks that we record, I'm going to apply a preset set of filters to myself, Teflon, and Flo. We have the advantage of always recording in the same space with the same equipment, so none of that really changes. And then I get to focus just on our guest, whoever that happens to be for the week. So usually a couple of minutes figuring that out, and then I just listen to the episode and make sure that the changes I made make sense. If they don't, I'll pause, adjust bass, adjust treble, adjust gate, whatever. And then I hit play and go again and make sure it works. Once all of that's done, and by the way, there are a billion good tutorials on YouTube for whatever audio interface you're going to use. This is not the only way to use Reaper. It's not even a good way to use Reaper. It's just the way that I use it. But YouTube is chock full of tutorials on how to make this work. Either way, once we're done and once we've got the episode recorded and edited how we want and saved to an MP3, I'm probably going to pitch that into iMovie and let it make it just a video with Vidalia's artwork. And then we're going to take that over to Anchor. There it is. Anchor, like I said, that's the hosting platform by Spotify. So they really want you to use their platform. And we'll look at the analytics, right? So we're looking at some sample here. Oh, let me scroll. There we go. So we can see our performance day over day for the last 90 days. We can see what our top episodes are. You got to kind of mouse over these. So 6 Promethea, one of our more popular episodes. The Subway episode is for some reason really popular. Have to double back into that one. This is where we get our demographic data, where people are listening. So by and large on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, that's kind of new. Here's our gender breakdown. So male, female, non-binary, and age breakdown. So useful stats. It's going to tell you where your listeners are really coming in at. You can get per episode stats too. The one downside with Anchor is it actually takes a while for the stats to populate. So like we'll go back to the WAP episode and you can see, yeah, still not enough. So roughly 50% of people make it to this point. If anybody makes it past the first 30 minutes or so, they listen to the entire episode. That's good for us to know. We can see how it stacks up. So our most popular episode is still episode 1. Sometimes it's just a factor of time. We can see though, it's definitely in the running. It's more popular than kind of our 4th most popular, Sir Michael Hammer of God. So sorry, Sir Michael. And you can always go back and retrieve your files if you need. Same thing for YouTube. When you throw stuff into YouTube, you get somewhat more useful analytics. So just in the last 30 days, we have 140 hours of watch time. That's people paying attention to our content. You'll get, oh God, where did it go? Engagement. Nope, audience. Nope, it is engagement, sorry. So this is where you get your average view durations. How long do people spend watching before they fall off? Typically 30 minutes. You're gonna see that a lot. People expect shorter content on YouTube. That's one of the things that we actually like to try to pay attention to. You can actually see in specific files or in specific episodes where people start to fall off and where people start to maybe pick up. Sometimes they'll just skip through the content until they find something. And once they stick around and listen for a few minutes, YouTube says that's the moment where they really latched on. But either way, you're going to take your episode, you're going to throw it up into YouTube, you're going to schedule it. Same thing for Anchor. It makes it super easy to do it. It's entirely worthwhile. You also have the ability to, Anchor gives you a small public site. So if you go to anchor.com/WAK-podcast, it's going to give you a platform where you can find all of our content. So, and then beyond that, we take it, I put it in Google Drive. I also take the file directly off the SD card and put it into, I have a home server where I run OwnCloud. So I have a backup there. I have a backup that's not in my house. And then we also have the SD card itself, which once we've filled one up, we take it and we seal it away in a little lockbox with all the other SD cards. So I know that's a really, really roughshod way of going through it. We schedule it and plan it out in Trello. We edit the audio in Reaper. We upload on YouTube and Anchor, and then we look at the analytics. That's pretty much all I've got at this point. If there's any more questions, go ahead and ask them. Otherwise, I'll make this video available as well as these slides available on the same Facebook post where you found it in the first place. I'll also send it to the event organizers, just so if they want to put it up somewhere, they can. But it'll be a little bit before those things come out, just because the video takes a minute to upload. All right, last chance for questions. Going once, going twice. All right, I'm gonna stop my screen share. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. If you have further questions now that we're done, you can always reach out to me on Facebook. My name's Lucas Bailey. You can reach out to Vidalia as well. She's Baronet Vidalia on Facebook, makes it super easy. So don't hesitate to let us know if you have questions. One of the things I wanna see is more people making content for their specific use case. We did a Black History Month episode. And they pointed out on that episode that it would be really cool if more people talked about, minority, the experience in Amtgard for minorities. And obviously, I'm not the person to do that full time. But I told them, I'll send you everything I have so you can make a podcast of your own. And I think that would be really cool. Everybody has a viewpoint that's worth looking into. So it's just a matter of how you make it, how you get it out there. So if you're looking into a podcast or even a YouTube platform, I hope this helped. Thank you so much, everybody.